It was my first real job after moving to the city. Fresh out of college, struggling to find my footing in a place that felt overwhelming and unfamiliar. So, when I saw the "Help Wanted" sign posted in the window of an old laundromat on a quiet street corner, I didn't hesitate. I needed the income, and it seemed like a straightforward gig. Who couldn't handle washing clothes? Little did I know, the laundromat wasn't just old, it was haunted. The first time I walked into the laundromat, I immediately felt the weight of its history. The building was small, with flickering fluorescent lights and rows of washing machines that had seen better days. The faded blue walls, cracked tiles, and the musty smell of detergent and bleach in the air told me it hadn't been updated in a long time. The place looked like it had been forgotten by time, but not in a charming, vintage way. More like it had been left behind by a world that had moved on. The owner, Mr. Calloway, was an older man with a sharp, almost unsettling gaze. His clothes were outdated, like a costume from the 70s, but it wasn't his style that made him memorable. It was his mannerisms. He barely spoke, just a few curt words here and there, and when he did, his voice was low, as though he didn't want anyone to hear him. He didn't explain much about the job when I first started, just handed me a schedule, showed me where the supplies were, and pointed me toward the back room where the laundry baskets were stored. "You'll work mostly evenings. There's no rush on the laundry. Don't worry about the machines too much." His words lingered, his eyes fixed on me as if studying my every move. "Just keep everything running smoothly. The customers know what they're doing." There was something odd about him, but I chalked it up to his age. Older people tend to act strange, right? The laundromat itself wasn't busy at first. There were a few regulars who came in to do their laundry, but most of the time it was just me, Mr. Calloway, and the hum of the washing machines. The machines were ancient, some of them barely functional, but they worked. At least, they worked enough for the laundromat to stay open. The first sign that something was off came that evening, just a few hours into my shift. A woman came in, looking frazzled, her clothes wrinkled and her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was in her mid-30s, probably a mother, and she looked like she had a lot on her plate. She dropped her laundry into the nearest machine without a word, but I could feel her eyes on me as she did. I smiled and nodded, trying to be friendly, but she didn't return the smile. Instead, she just stared at the machines as they started to spin. I didn't think much of it, but after she left, I noticed something strange. The clothes in her basket, she hadn't left any detergent or fabric softener behind, were different. The fabric looked darker than before, the colors more saturated, almost as if they were too clean, too perfect. I brushed it off as a trick of the light. I didn't know much about laundry after all. The next customer, an older man with a weathered face, seemed to act equally strange. He came in around midnight when the laundromat was completely quiet. He carried a large duffel bag, and when he opened it, I saw the clothes inside black, stained, and tattered. As he placed them into the machines, he muttered something under his breath. It was incoherent, but there was a tone to it that I couldn't shake. It was like a chant, a rhythmic series of words that echoed in the empty space. I tried to ask if he needed help, but he just shook his head, his eyes darting around nervously as if he was worried someone would hear him. He finished loading the machines, turned, and left without a word, leaving me alone in the dimly lit laundromat. I glanced at the machines, the clothes inside, and noticed something unsettling. The stains on the fabric, the ones I had assumed were permanent, began to disappear. They weren't gone entirely, but they faded in a way that didn't seem natural. The clothes were too clean. I moved closer, feeling a slight chill creep over me as I watched the spinning cycle, the clothes tumbling over and over again. As the washer hummed, I heard something faint, almost inaudible, like a soft whisper, coming from the machines. I quickly turned and looked around, but there was no one there. It had to have been my imagination, right? Maybe the sound of the machines was playing tricks on me. I shrugged it off and returned to the back room, deciding to keep my head down and focus on the tasks at hand. But as the night went on, things started to get weirder. The machines began to sound different, a low hum at first, then a creaking that seemed unnatural. I glanced toward the front of the laundromat, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something flicker, like a shadow moving across the wall. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling. It was late. I was tired, and it was just an old building. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. The following days blurred together as I worked the late-night shifts at the laundromat. At first, I tried to ignore the strange happenings, the whispered voices from the machines, the eerie feeling that never seemed to leave. But as the days passed, the oddities grew harder to brush off. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something wasn't right in that place. It started small. The laundry that customers brought in seemed to take longer to dry than usual. I didn't think much of it at first. The dryers were old, and maybe the load was too heavy. Or perhaps it was just my lack of experience showing. But when I checked the dryer after it had gone through a full cycle, the clothes were still damp, some even wetter than before. I'd run it again, thinking it was just a malfunction, but the result was always the same: slightly damp clothes as though the dryer wasn't functioning properly. I decided to give it one more try and set the dryer to a longer cycle, but after an hour, the clothes still weren't dry. Something about the fabric felt wrong. They weren't just damp, they were cold. And as I pulled the clothes out of the dryer, I noticed something unsettling. The fabric was slightly stiff, almost as if the fibers had hardened, like they had been subjected to something far worse than mere washing and drying. A deep, unshakable unease settled over me. It wasn't just the clothes, it was the air, the place itself. The laundromat felt too quiet, too still. I glanced at the old clock on the wall. It was well past midnight, and no one else had been in for the last hour. The city outside was completely silent. The usual hum of passing cars, people walking by, was gone. Everything outside the laundromat felt distant, like it didn't belong to this world anymore. I decided to take a break, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I stepped outside, but as soon as I opened the door, I froze. A man stood in the parking lot. He was tall, dressed in a heavy coat despite the warm evening, and he stared at the laundromat with a strange, almost calculating gaze. His posture was unnaturally still, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as though he were waiting for something, or someone. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I had seen him before. I quickly dismissed the thought, assuming he was just another customer. But as I turned to head back inside, something about him made me hesitate. I felt his eyes follow me as I stepped back into the laundromat, and the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. I ignored the unsettling sensation and continued my shift, but it wasn't long before something else caught my attention. The dryer, the one I had used to dry the clothes, started to hum louder than usual. I walked over to it, and as I opened the door, I was hit with a rush of cold air and the smell. Something metallic, almost like iron, like blood. I pulled the clothes out quickly, my heart racing. They were still damp, But now there was something else, something I couldn't place. The fabric felt too smooth, like the fibers had been stripped of any texture. I ran my fingers across one of the shirts and the sensation made my stomach turn. It felt like it was made of plastic, but the surface was unnaturally smooth. My fingers brushed against something sharp inside the material, and I immediately dropped it. As I stepped back from the dryer, my breath caught in my throat. I looked at the other clothes piled on the counter, and I noticed the same thing. There was something wrong with them. They were stiff, unnatural. They looked like they had been washed in the blood of something, someone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't ordinary clothes. They weren't just damp. They were tainted. And the worst part? I was the one who had been handling them. I couldn't explain it. I could barely even process it. What was happening? Why was this happening? I heard the door creak open behind me and I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. The man from the parking lot had entered the laundromat. His eyes were fixed on me, his gaze still cold and calculated, as if he'd been watching me the entire time. "You're having trouble with the machines." His voice was low, steady, but his words sent a chill down my spine. How did he know? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, trying to maintain control. But he didn't stop there. He moved slowly toward the counter where the clothes were piled up, and he leaned in, examining them with a cold, detached look. The clothes, they don't ever come clean here. His voice was barely above a whisper, and it sent a shiver down my spine. They never leave the way they came in. I took a step back, my heart pounding, but he didn't look up. He was so absorbed in his inspection of the clothes that he didn't notice my rising panic. "Who are you? What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking now. The man turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. "They were alive once." His voice dropped to a whisper, and his words seemed to resonate in the air like a strange chant. "But now they're trapped. The laundromat keeps them here. And you're going to help keep them from escaping." The room suddenly felt colder. The lights above flickered erratically, and the air became thick, heavy with a presence I couldn't explain. My mind raced, but nothing made sense. Was I going mad? Or had I somehow stumbled into something far darker than I could comprehend? "You're a part of this now." The man's voice was soft but firm, the words echoing in my mind as I took another step back. The clothes, they weren't just clothes anymore. They were something else, something that had been caught in the laundromat's grip, trapped in a cycle that would never end. And now, it seemed, so was I. The man's words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. They were alive once. His voice echoed in my mind, resonating with a terrible finality. I stumbled back from him, feeling the room close in around me. My heart raced, and my palms were slick with cold sweat. I had no idea what he meant, but everything about this place, the strange, unexplainable things I'd witnessed since starting my shift, was beginning to feel like a trap. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his cold, calculating gaze still fixed on the clothes I had set aside on the counter. It was like he could see something in them that I couldn't, something more than just ordinary fabric. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped between his words and the reality of what was happening around me. The laundromat, this cursed place, seemed to be watching me now, waiting for me to understand. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" The clothes, they're just laundry." The man smiled, a thin, almost knowing smile, and then looked back at the clothes, running his hand lightly over the stiff fabric. They were people. His voice was barely a whisper now, but it felt like it was inside my head. "You've seen them. You felt it too, haven't you?" I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. The clothes? How could they have been people? It didn't make sense. I could feel the weight of his words, but my mind refused to accept them. My stomach twisted, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. "You're part of this now," the man continued, his eyes darkening. "You can't leave, not now." I recoiled from him, backing up toward the counter. The sensation of being trapped, suffocated, crawled up my spine. There was no escape. The laundromat had already claimed me, and no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I could feel the truth of his words in every fiber of my being. The machines hummed louder now, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and grow, crawling across the walls and floor. The lights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows over everything. I could feel the temperature drop, and a sense of unease washed over me. The room seemed to pulse with some unnatural energy, and I realized with growing horror that it wasn't just the man who was watching me. I looked toward the machines, half expecting to see the usual customers' laundry tumbling inside, but instead I saw something else. The clothes that had been placed into the machines earlier, those clothes that had been stiff, were now moving. I could see them shift slightly, writhing inside the washers like they were alive. My throat went dry. No, this wasn't possible. The laundry was just fabric. But why did it feel like the machines themselves were breathing? Why did it feel like the clothes were waiting? It's not just the clothes. The man's voice pierced my thoughts, and I turned to see him standing much closer now. Too close. It's everything in here. This laundromat has its own hunger. It feeds off the souls of those who come through. That's why the clothes never get clean. They can't. They're still here. I staggered back, my mind trying to grasp at the edges of something I couldn't understand. "You're insane," I snapped, desperate to hold on to some semblance of reality. "This is just a laundromat. It's just a place to do laundry. There's nothing wrong with it." He looked at me with a mixture of pity and sadness, as though he were watching a child who didn't understand the world around them. "That's the illusion," he said softly. "This place isn't like the others. It's been here for longer than you can imagine, hiding in plain sight. It doesn't just wash clothes, it traps them, and it traps the souls inside them." I could barely process his words, but the weight of his gaze seemed to weigh down on me. The air in the laundromat grew even colder, and I felt a chill settle deep into my bones. I turned back toward the machines, and this time I saw them clearly. The clothes, those clothes, were no longer just fabric. They had changed. The edges of the garments were frayed and torn, but more than that, I saw faces. Faces, distorted, half-formed, and yet unmistakable. Eyes, mouths, skin, all stretched across the fabric like they were trapped inside, begging for release. I gasped, stepping back, my legs shaking as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. The faces twisted, their features contorting in silent screams, and I heard it. A faint, distant whisper, growing louder as the clothes moved inside the machines. "Let us out. Let us out." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to look away, but it was no use. The sound was inside my mind, growing louder, more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The air was thick with something I couldn't define, something dark and heavy, pressing against me from all sides. The man's words echoed again, his voice like a soft whisper. "You're part of it now. You'll never leave. The laundromat has claimed you, just like it claimed them." I stumbled backward, my breath shallow and ragged, but I couldn't move fast enough. The shadows around me seemed to close in, the darkness growing deeper, and I realized then what he had meant. The laundromat wasn't just a place to clean clothes. It was a place that trapped them, trapped the souls of the people who used it, and I had walked right into its grasp. And now, the laundromat was waiting for me to become part of it too. The room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around me and the air grew colder with every passing second. The laundry machines hummed louder, almost as if they were alive, each cycle seeming to pull me deeper into the nightmare. My pulse was racing, my heart pounding in my ears, and I could feel my legs shaking beneath me as I took one slow step back, trying to distance myself from the horrors I could no longer ignore. The clothes in the machines were moving, twisting, tearing, and the faces, they were so real. The way the fabric stretched and contorted, the mouths opening and closing in silent screams. I could hear them, faintly at first, but growing louder, like the air around me was thickening with their cries. "Please, let us go." The words were muffled but unmistakable. The voices weren't coming from the machines. They were coming from the clothes themselves, as though the fabric had been made to hold them prisoner. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my body was rooted to the floor, paralyzed by fear. How could this be happening? How could clothes contain souls? It didn't make sense, but there it was, undeniable and horrifying. I looked at the man, the one who had been watching me since I started this job. His cold gaze was fixed on me, his face unreadable. There was no hint of remorse, no apology for the nightmare I'd been thrust into. He was calm, almost too calm. The weight of his gaze pressed down on me, like he was waiting for something, waiting for me to accept the truth, to understand what I had become a part of. "It's not just the clothes." His voice was soft, almost too soft, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "It's the whole place, the laundromat. It's alive, in a way. And now, so are you." I shook my head, trying to grasp at something real, something solid, but everything around me felt like it was slipping away. The laundromat wasn't just a place to clean clothes, it was something darker, something that fed on the souls of the people who came in, and I had walked right into its grasp. "You didn't have a choice," the man said, as though reading my thoughts. His eyes didn't leave me, and for the first time I could see the faintest hint of something in them. Something older, something far darker. None of us did. I took a step back, my breath shallow, my heart racing. I didn't understand what he was saying. How could I be part of this? How could the laundromat trap me, trap anyone? But I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping it. There was no leaving. Not now. I looked at the machines again. The clothes still writhing inside. The faces, the eyes, they were all staring at me. I could feel their desperation, their pain, their anger. And then, one by one, the machines began to stop. The sounds of the spinning drums, the thumping of the washing cycles, all faded into silence. The room was still. And then, the machines began to hum again, but this time, it wasn't just the usual hum of a washing machine. It was something else, something that vibrated through my very bones. The clothes inside began to tumble again, but this time the movement was different. They weren't just washing. They were calling. I tried to turn away, but something held me in place. I couldn't leave. The laundromat had become part of me, and I had become part of it. The air felt heavy with the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for someone like me to step inside. "You've been chosen," the man said again, his voice now a low murmur. "Just like everyone else, the ones before you, the ones who've worked here. We're all part of it. We've all been absorbed into the laundromat, into its hunger." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but it wasn't just physical. It was as though the very essence of the laundromat was crawling under my skin, seeping into my soul. I could feel the energy of the place, the darkness that pulsed beneath the floors, beneath the machines. The clothes, the souls trapped inside them, were the first step. And now, I was the next. I backed away from the counter, but it was like there was nowhere to go. The walls of the laundromat seemed to bend and warp, the space around me stretching into something unrecognizable. I could hear the whispering voices again, louder now, more insistent. "Stay. You belong here now. Join us." My knees felt weak, my body trembling as the overwhelming presence of the laundromat pressed down on me. It wasn't just the machines. It wasn't just the clothes. It was the building itself. The entity that had made this place its home. A place where souls were trapped, forced to serve its endless hunger. I felt something cold slide up my back, like icy fingers brushing against my skin. I whipped around, but no one was there. Only the machines, still humming, the clothes still twisting in their cycles, and the faces, those faces, staring at me with silent screams. The presence was everywhere, and there was no escape. "You can't leave." The man's voice was soft but firm, like a final command. "You are one of us now." I opened my mouth to scream, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. The laundromat had swallowed me whole, and now there was no way out. The clothes, the machines, the shadows, they were all part of it. And so was I. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was the faces in the machines, their mouths opening, silently calling for me to join them, to become part of the endless cycle.